Let's talk a little bit about rumination, because I think it's one of the most important things to understand about healing from narcissistic abuse. It relates to the friend you just talked about.
Absolutely.
Rumination is can't stop thinking, can't stop thinking. Now, here's where rumination gets interesting. One thing the research tells us, even from the times of Charles Darwin, we have argued that rumination has a function, right? It does.
What is it?
The function of rumination is a solution. Think on something long enough and you'll come to the solution, right? Okay, oh, got it. And then you do the thing and the rumination, prize, and you feel better. The problem with narcissistic abuse is ruminate, no solution. Ruminate, no solution, ruminate, no solution. So where many other ruminators are getting to solutions, the narcissistically abused ruminator just keeps hitting the same wall, which fuels powerlessness, and rumination without a solution is depression.
Wow.
So you see what's happening is that's why the survivors look depressed. When they come into a clinician's office, rumination is a central part of the depression profile. In fact, Darwin and others have argued that all that rumination, it actually leads the person to almost turn inward and becomes part of sort of the process of trying to find solutions in depression, but it gets the person stuck in the soup, right?
I'm thinking about this person, and they have isolated themselves.
Yep, exactly.
They are basically this once vibrant, amazing person is literally living a very, very small life, is stuck in the thinking. The last time I saw this person, she was thinking about what's going to happen at her daughter's wedding when the ex brings a new girl. By the way, the daughter's not even engaged.
And may never get married.
Right. But I'm saying you're exactly right, because they're spinning their wheels in isolation on a problem that has no solution.
So it becomes depression. So the tricky bit is rumination is a key part of almost every mental health issue, anxiety, depression, you name it. But it holds a unique spot for survivors of narcissistic abuse because they're going through something that most people don't understand. Not even a lot of therapists don't understand it, but certainly their friends. A lot of people are like, come on, get over it. Like, he's a terrible guy. You should be happy you're out of it. But they don't feel happy. Find someone you can talk about this about so many times until you actually let it out. Probably the best place to do that is therapy. I have clients, I think of some of my clients, and they'll over and over say, I feel like a loser. I'm telling you this again. I said, you think you're telling me the same story, but every time you tell it, you've actually put another piece of it down. I'm hearing the difference. You're not. And every time they tell the story, we're putting another piece of it down to the point where they finally release it. Friends aren't always the best place to do it, right? Because friends are like, how many times have you told me this? I'm sick of it. I'm literally like,
I've heard about this crap for 10 years, and you're in therapy, and this is an issue, and it makes me profoundly sad to see that this ex has moved on and is very happy, doesn't think about you at all other than to complain about any time something with the kids, and you are living in a mental hole.
Right, and is still living in service to the partner. So has still not pulled themselves psychologically out. This is really about pulling out all the connections. You know how when you take you take wallpaper or something off a wall, you leave all those sticky bits. You got to get in there and get all those sticky bits off.
I want to take a step back and talk a little bit about the definition of being a survivor of narcissistic abuse. How would you describe someone or what being a survivor of narcissistic abuse is?
So a survivor of narcissistic abuse is, in essence, a survivor of a narcissistic relationship, right? They've experienced all the patterns we've already talked about in the prior episode, the devaluing, the minimization, the gaslighting, the manipulation, the domination, the betrayal, the breadcrumbing, all that stuff, like being minimized, devalued, all that. That happens. Those are the behaviors. That's what narcissistic abuse is, by the way. It's the behaviors in the relationship. Being chronically exposed to that and not understanding what the hell is going on leads to a fallout in the person. We also talked about the anxiety, the helplessness, the rumination, the regret, all that stuff, okay? And so the person's experiencing all these negative experiences and don't want to keep feeling that way.
Yes.
To be a survivor of a narcissistic relationship or narcissistic abuse is to have all these sorts of negative, emotional, physical, cognitive, even spiritual. People report a loss of faith, a loss of belief in the world, a loss of trust. All of those things are a byproduct of having gone through one of these relationships. And if a person is not taught what narcissism is, how it shows up in them, what was happening in the relationship, and above all else, being sort of coaxed into radical acceptance, these behaviors are never going to change. These patterns are never going to change. You can set a clock by this person. Years ago, Mel, I worked with a client who was a tough sell on this. And I did something very unorthodox as a therapist. The person would come in and say, I think that this is going to happen. I said, no, actually, I think this is what's going to go down. She said, there's no way that that's what's going to go on down. I said, you want to make a bet? And so at the time, I had a office that was on top of like a coffee shop. And it was a pain in the neck for me. It was actually across the street, down across the street. And it's a very busy road, so it's hard to cross the street.
Okay.
So that someone would bring me tea would be the greatest thing ever. I said, I'll make you a bet. And if it goes down the way I say it goes down, you buy me a tea and you bring it to your session. This is not how we're supposed to do therapy. I'm bored of psychology. Please don't listen.
Do it.
So we did that. By the time I was done, she probably had brought me 60 cups of tea. I think only once did I get it wrong, and I had to get the coffee once. It was a bummer. I drove, but got it. 60 cups of tea.
So is that somebody who is so disconnected with reality?
No,
like, what the heck?
It was the hope. Here's where it got interesting. And this is what, to me, the more important part of it. Ended therapy and said, you know what? Thank you. Thank you for the fact that this entire therapeutic experience cost me hundreds more because of the tea. But she said it was your conviction. She's like, you already had the coaster out for the tea. Like, you were ready for that. Because I know she'd come in with the tea sheepishly. She didn't tell me in advance. The tea would show up. I was like, and so she said, you were so sure. And that assuredness, that conviction, it showed me this had to be a pattern. You didn't have a crystal ball. You weren't a future reader, right? You knew this as a pattern. Over time, she said, I kind of knew it could be the other way. Like, it's almost like she said, by the 60th cup of tea, I got it, right? I saw it, and then was better able to predict what was going to happen. So my point in sharing that is that we know this, but the other person needs they need a minute. Radical acceptance isn't like, here's what narcissism is, and that's them, and look at all these things that happen. In fact, one of the techniques I talk about in the book is something I affectionately call the ick list. And I say to the client, need to make no moves in this relationship. Nothing has to change, but I need you to write it all down. Every time they do something, and if you're not writing it down, I'm writing it down in here, and I'm going to keep it. And over time, this list gets to the point where you're like, oh, this is a pattern. And seeing it in writing makes it more real.
What you said about hope is genius. Because with this particular example that I've just shared with this friend of mine, I personally believe, if I were to make a bet, that she hopes they get back together.
Correct.
And so if this is resonating with you as you're listening, what I want to know, Dr. Ramani, is if you're holding out hope that that parent's going to change, if you're holding out hope that things could be different, if you're holding out hope that this person that is narcissistic in your life, that somehow something is going to be different, how do you start to dismantle this thing that you've been holding on to forever that keeps you completely enmeshed in this relationship and this freaking fantasy in your brain?
Part of it is the writing it down. I know it sounds like a strange thing to suggest, but there's something very different because euphoric recall is a very real phenomenon.
What is euphoric recall? What is that?
Euphoric recall it's almost like a twist on what our minds usually don't do, but in narcissistic relationships, people cherry pick the good stuff. We did have a really nice time in Miami 10 years ago, and they really did, like, we laughed so much at that TV show. Like, our sex was actually really good. Like, euphoric recall, pick the good things. That's why writing it down with people who watch the relationship and get the relationship, just getting it all down, because there's times you're not going to be able to get it down. I've helped a lot of clients write these ick lists. I'm like, well, remember that time you told me this? And they're like, And remember the time you told me that? And they'd keep like, oh, yes, I do. I'm so sorry. Yes, I get it. And so we pile it all up and you can't unsee it then. Right? It's there. It's almost like looking at the 5,000 transgressions of somebody like you're going to hire. Like you do realize if you bring them back, these are all the things he did.
Right.
An HR person would be like, yeah, no, we can't bring this person back. We can bring that. The more we have the data, that's one big piece to dismantling the hope. There's the other thing, again, talk about this in the book, is this idea of going into something I call going into the tiger's cage. Okay. So when a client's like, no, it's going to be different. Remember, Mel, as a therapist, my job is never to be dogmatic and say, absolutely not. If you do, I'll say, okay. I'm always going to hold space for the client to feel safe to go try something and that there's no judgment. So I'll say, no, I think it's going to be different. I'm like, okay. So
I couldn't be a therapist. I'd be like, you stupid idiot. It is not going to be different. Like I literally want to reach out and grab my friend and strangle some sense into her. I know that sounds like a very violent thing, but it breaks my heart.
I know, but this tiger's cage piece is I say to them, okay, so cage, cat. Now we're far enough from that cat. You're like, is that a cat or is that a tiger? There's only one way to find out. And they'll say, no, I want to find out which one it is. I'll say, go in the cage, which means have the interaction. Think it's going to be different. Tell them your good news and think they're going to be happy for you, or confront them on something, whatever it is. And it pains me as a therapist because you know how it's going to go down, right? And they go in and invariably, like if it was a tiger, what's a tiger going to do? It's going to, tear off your arms and legs and tear your throat out. If it's a kitten, well, you just got yourself a new little pet. Sometimes they go in and they have the difficult conversation. I'd say 1 in 1,000 times. It's a little kitty. Like
right.
they misjudge the person. More often not, I get this torn apart person and they're saying, it's like a cup of tea, right? You told me, and I went in there and I say, but this is material. So let's break it down. Those kinds of almost real-time analyses of these things are how we dismantle the hope. I mean, it's almost like an addict in that way, Mel. How many times does it have to pile up before a person hits rock bottom?
Depends on the person.
Different. Depends on the person.
Depends on the person.
I'm really trying to get the survivor to their rock bottom. Rock bottom is where hope goes away.
There is so much content out there about how to spot a narcissist. What do you do once you realize you either have a parent who's one or you're in a relationship with somebody?
People don't like the suggestion I'm about to make, and I'm aware they don't like it, and I don't care. I'm going to make it, which is what I call